frankly, one of the best political speeches I've heard any Canadian political leader give on Canada-US relations in a long time.
Are the Liberals scared? Welcome back to Moose and Loose. My name's David. It sure looks that way because we have CTV pundit desperately trying to defend Mark Carney. We've got Avi Lewis likely to win the NDP leadership, going to be pulling back support. Pierre with a slam dunk week down in America. Meanwhile, both Mark Carney and Tim Hodgson on vacation. More jobs are being lost. We got a bunch of stuff here. Let's jump into this. Starting this episode off, we got Melissa posting this. Canada is preparing for a $6 billion increase in employment insurance for fiscal year 25-26. This comes as Carney federal government also announces cutting of 12,000 full-time job equivalents. Remember when they campaigned on they wouldn't be doing that? And, well, Carney lied as usual. Speaking of Carney, where is he? Well, we've got his flight tracker here. So he's on vacation still. We can see he went to London. Then he sent all his delegation home. He met with King Charles. Brookfield had that big merger. No media around to see what Carney's up to. Then he flew to Paris on the 17th. He stayed there for 2 days, and then he flew from Paris to Rome on the 19th. And he's still in Rome right now, which we can see here. Ryan Garrettson posting this. Mark Carney at the Sistine Chapel in Vatican City enjoying world premiere of Sir James Macmillan Angels Unawares with former UK PM Theresa May. Captain Climate has traveled the equivalent of 6.25 times around the Earth. So he's still in Rome right now, but we see he's set to depart to Ponta Delgada, which is the Azores Islands, on the 23rd. And then it shows another flight from the 23rd to Ottawa, also on the 23rd. So I don't know if he's just stopping over there, wants to stop for lunch in a gorgeous location. Is this just a refueling stop? So here's Ponta Delgada. It says it's Portugal, but this is the Azores Islands. If we zoom out, you can see Azores far off the coast of Portugal over here. So this location, absolutely gorgeous. Not sure why he's stopping here, but seems like they've turned their tracker off. And speaking of wheels in motion, we got Melissa posting this. Monday brings mass layoffs at Algoma Steel, hitting Canada hard. This could have been avoided if we had leadership in our government instead of anti-American, anti-Trump, and now we have people losing their jobs. So more people losing their job at Algoma Steel.
Monday will mark the final shift for many workers at Algoma Steel. Union officials have been working to ensure those laid off are being treated properly as hundreds leave their posts.
We're all humans making all these decisions on who should stay and who shouldn't based on seniority, and people are phoning in. We're having to go back and double check our work to make sure that it is based on the collective.
Just every day in Canada, we got businesses shutting down, businesses going to America. As we see here, Bitfarm shareholders approve U.S. redomiciliation plan on track to complete the move from Canada to the U.S. As Melissa says, boom, Bitfarm shareholders vote in favor to move from Canada to U.S. 99.3% in favor. Is this elbows up? This helps Mark Carney stocks. Doesn't help us. Mr. Bench here posting Pierre Poilievre's Joe Rogan podcast is number 2 most popular podcast in 2026 on Joe Rogan's channel. So number 1 is Matt Damon and Ben Affleck. That's pretty hard act to follow there. 6 million views, and Pierre Poilievre at 1.94 million. I believe it's over 2 million now. Doing a live update here, it is almost 2.1 million views, 2.086. Looking at all the other stuff that comes out, most of the videos maybe hit 1 million views, some of them only 300,000, 1.6, 1.4, 700,000, 600,000. Pierre's interview here, well, it's number 2 on Rogan's podcast for the year. And with that, we've got Jin Lai here sharing this comment on the podcast. This guy here is saying, I was never a fan of you, Mr. Poilievre. After watching this, I realized how many lies the Canadian media and Canadian politicians tell about you. Mark Carney and Trudeau took advantage of Canadians' trusting nature, just as I showed you with that polling data from the previous video. We're a high trust society. The Liberals weaponized that against us. He goes on to say, and after 10 years of their destruction of Canada can no longer be hidden. I never thought I would vote Conservative in my life. You, sir, have changed my mind. You are a man of the people, and now you have my full support. God bless. People are changing their minds here. It's taking some time. Unfortunately, we didn't have this before the election, but better late than never. We also got some youth here asked on the street. Eli here getting the youth's opinion on the Rogan podcast.
Mark Carney's been Prime Minister for a year now. What do you think of his Prime Ministership, his leadership?
I don't know. I don't agree with some things he's done, so I do want there to be another election, but of course, if we can't make a change, then I would agree with the separation, yeah.
And so I'm assuming between Poilievre and Carney, you're supporting Poilievre?
Yeah. I was just listening to the podcast of Joe Rogan. It's a very good listen. Recommend everyone listens to it. Yeah, it's very good. They were talking about, so the oil sands, one part is the false narrative of how dirty the oil sands are in Fort Mac. So Joe Rogan brought up how they're ruining the environment. And I like how Pierre instantly went against him. He said, no, we do it the cleanest in the world. So that was a good part of it. And then he talked about criminals being let out too much. So I do agree with that too. Making sure people who they offend multiple times, they get harsher punishments.
Youth are waking up here. It's funny, there's a teacher here. This person says, oil sands have caused substantial localized environmental degradation, yada, 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 yada. Well, what would you prefer? That we live like barbarians? Like in the Stone Age? Like people in Africa where they literally live in huts because they don't have oil, they don't have energy. What would these people suggest? Eco-green agenda? Solar panels everywhere? It doesn't produce enough energy. These people are so ideologically driven, they don't wake up to reality that oil and gas powers the world right now. If we had nuclear reactors everywhere powering everything, yeah, that would be a cleaner solution, but I don't think they can build them that fast. It's a very slow process. We're already the world leader on this, and this is just starting to ramp up. The small modular reactors, it's just sad you have educators like this who are clearly uneducated about what runs the world. Jumping over to CTV, we've got quite the thing. Scott Reed defending Mark Carney, and we've got Tom Mulcair praising Pierre Poilievre.
And I think that Poilievre handled himself well in it. I like the way he pushed back on Trump. I like the way he pushed back on Rogan a couple times. But, take all of this together. I think this strategy of meeting with U.S. leaders, media, business leaders, I think all that makes a lot of sense. But I still think there's a challenge here in his message. And it came through not just on the podcast, but elsewhere. And that is his core message is, look, we got to reattach ourselves to the United States as fully and as fast as possible. And so when he stood in the streets of New York City and said, listen, my message is that Americans love us, I think that feels a little off to a lot of Canadians. I think a lot of Canadians say, I'm feeling wary. Auto workers, steel producers.
Auto workers and steel producers, the ones losing their jobs. Algoma steel workers losing their jobs today. Auto workers have lost their jobs. They're feeling wary about getting attached to the United States. If there was a deal struck, they would get their jobs back. These tariffs would be lifted. Production would continue. This guy's insane. This is just desperate. They are scared that Pierre Poilievre is going to start rising in the polls. That's what this is. And you got to remember, Scott Reed here, his son was just hired by Mark Carney. They should really have a header or something on the top. They're just stating this, Jack Reed was just hired. Right here, Prime Minister Mark Carney added a number of new aides to his team, and Jack Reed is one of them. Scott Reed's son. They should be openly stating that when he starts to speak. They need to be transparent that he's got interest in Mark Carney staying as Prime Minister.
Farmers, I think a lot of people are saying, just hang on a second. So I think he navigated the pod pretty well, but that core message, I still think needs some refinement. There's real risk. Greg Abbott is an ally of Trump's. Whether you like him or not, the truth is Rogan is rocket fuel for the MAGA movement. And Pierre Poilievre's got to be careful that he doesn't look like he's vying for the position of MAGA's most preferred Prime Minister of Canada, because that ain't going to play with Canadians.
What's playing with Canadians right now? The guy who's over in the Azores Islands on vacation, that guy, he's not fighting for Canadians. Pierre Poilievre looked like a statesman, looked like he was the guy actually in charge of our country for the past week. All the while was Carney getting his bunions rubbed by someone. Now check out this. Tom Mulcair praising Pierre Poilievre's trip down to America and going on Rogan.
I thought he was super well prepared. And for something that was going to last that long, every time he would get to something tricky, like a good slalom skier, just make the right move, slow down just enough, get through it, wouldn't touch some of the obvious traps, was really thinking about what he was going to say. I thought it was an outstanding piece of political communication. And it was
an outstanding piece from the former NDP leader. And speaking of NDP leader, Avi Lewis likely to win the leadership bid here soon, very soon. We're down to a couple of days now, which will really help the Conservatives. This might swing the whole thing.
Bookended by a speech that he gave later on in New York that, frankly, one of the best political speeches I've heard any Canadian political leader give on Canada-U.S. relations in a long time. He's ditched that.
One of the best speeches ever on Canada-U.S. relations. This is more than just a glowing review.
He's ditched that tone that used to drive everybody up the wall. He was on the same serious tone that he used at that economic conference in Toronto recently. And the content of that speech, on top of the proper tone, was outstanding. I mean, he gave a better explanation as to why it was a mistake for the Americans to be pushing tariffs when he talked about the fact that Trump's main argument was, oh, Canada's got a trade surplus with the United States. Yes, we do, because we're selling you $100 billion a year of oil that we sell you cheap. And do you want us to stop that so we can get rid of the trade surplus? I mean, he didn't quite finish that sentence, but he just left it hanging there, which is another artful thing to do. So I think that between the Toronto speech and the New York speech and the appearance on Rogan, we are indeed starting to see a whole new Pierre Poilievre, and it's one that I think the Canadians are going to warm to much more than they have to the tone that we've seen from him in the past.
What's interesting is Canadians seem to be okay with Mark Carney being condescending, arrogant, this smug banker talking down to people in the House of Commons. We've also seen this a lot with female journalists. When Pierre Poilievre's the attack dog in the House of Commons, then he gets painted as this angry guy. He's always so angry. So really does Poilievre well to just be more statesman-like, less bulldog, because then they can't pin him on that. As we see here, so they go back to Scott Reed. He's trying to trick Canadians here, saying that Pierre Poilievre is always this angry guy, when in reality, when he's holding the government to account, it's full of criticism. That's what it is. When he's outside the House of Commons, he's a normal guy. They only see one side of the guy, but Scott Reed here is trying his best to help Carney out with this.
He's been somebody for 25 years. Suddenly he's going to be somebody else. I think that's very difficult. On the timing issue, obviously he needs this issue set to change, or he's almost certainly sunk. As long as what we're talking about is Trump, no matter how thoughtful his speeches might be, I just don't think he's going to rank up against the prime minister.
Is that because your son just got hired by the prime minister? He's trying to paint this narrative here that Poilievre has suddenly changed and this isn't believable, when in reality, they just saw one side. Obviously, they saw the critical bulldog in the House of Commons. Have you seen him hang out with his kids? Do you think he's being a bulldog then, or is he just being a loving father?
The thing I would say is, let's put this in historical context. And I know I sound like a rain cloud here, but he's trying to do something really, really difficult, because once the public forms an opinion of an opposition leader, once that is hardened and set, the examples of opposition leaders who've been able to reverse that opinion, change what people think about them, and reinvent themselves, not very many. In fact, I can think of zero. Maybe Joe Clark, but he had to wait until he was a minister before people were willing to accept a new interpretation of it. Very difficult what he's trying to achieve.
You see what he's saying here? He's trying to tell you what to think. You can't change your opinion of Pierre Poilievre. You think he's bad, just leave it that way. Don't change your opinion, because it's too hard, and it never happens. This is all a narrative that they're telling here. They get Scott Reed to come on to be the voice of Mark Carney, but Canadians aren't buying this crap. You see the comments on the Joe Rogan podcast there on that video. They're just shocked to see that side of Pierre. He's a normal guy. He likes MMA. He's a history buff, where the media's like, oh, he's always so angry all the time, just stomping around, so angry.
Okay, well, the last word goes to the former opposition leader on our panel. Your thoughts on that, Tom?
Well, I think there is a way of prosecuting the government without sounding scratchy every time you do it. And I think that that's the art that Mr. Poilievre has to learn how to master. He's talking not only to his opponent, he's talking to Canadians when he's doing that. And he wants to have more people on board. He doesn't want to just be driving the train. And that's the trick. I mean, he's got to be able to do both. I think he's showing a willingness to try to get there. And he's got good people around him who seem to be helping him get there. And, you know, Robert Bourassa had an expression that he loved, which was 6 months is an eternity in politics. And remember, Pierre Poilievre knows more about that than anybody else, because he went through a 6 months when he went from a 25-point lead to losing an election to Mark Carney. Mark Carney has not had an easy time over the past few weeks. Even when things were going well in India, when he couldn't get a message straight between Anita Anand and her ministry, when Carney himself started off with full-throated support for Trump in Iran and then started trying to back away, but he had left himself no room to maneuver. A few days ago, he was saying, no way Canada's getting involved in this thing. And then the next day he was saying, well, after all, I think we might be sending in the Navy or some other form of help. That's not consistency. Canadians need security right now, and they feel even more insecure if they're not getting consistent messaging. Nothing's changed in the polls. I agree with Scott on that. But I do think that the conditions are in place for things to get a lot more tight than they have been. And Poilievre is doing everything he can to get there, and I think he's doing it right.
So yeah, Pierre Poilievre hitting home runs down in America. We have the NDP leader, most likely Avi Lewis, stepping in just a few days. And we saw those polls where he had a huge pull in his ridings. So he'll definitely steal back one, but he'll be stealing back more ridings because people will be able to get away from Carney. A lot of the left, they don't like him because he's gone too far right, stealing Poilievre's stuff. They want something more left, and no one's more left than that guy. So you're going to see two fronts eating away at Carney's base there. So Carney is just going to focus on this unelected majority government. Does he roll out net zero agenda, start tanking our economy? Things get so drastically worse that riots break out into the streets? Who knows? It was almost at that point with Justin Trudeau in numerous press conferences or appearances, him walking across the street. I remember that one, he walked across the street and he had all these 30 some odd RCMP protecting him, people throwing rocks and all sorts of stuff at him, dropping F-bombs, just like an angry mob going after him. People haven't forgot about that. It hasn't gotten better. Carney will not be immune to that too if things keep getting worse, and he's profiting along the way. Now, jumping over to this panel here, we've got Steve Outhouse outlining their position on America. Vasi asking if this is risky for them to be doing this, saying we should be working with America and getting a deal. This is obviously common sense that we should be getting a deal with our biggest trading partner.
You mentioned the agenda. I think the thing that really sort of started to become crystallized for me throughout the last period, including the initial trip and everything, was there is a differentiator at the moment between the way in which Mr. Poilievre and Mr. Carney are talking about the future relationship with the United States, right? One is saying this is a permanent rupture, and Mr. Poilievre is contending that it won't be permanent, that is more temporary in character. And I'm from a strategic, we'll debate the policy with other people, but from a strategic perspective, I wondered if you have any concerns about that, coming up against a sentiment among the Canadian public that feels the opposite, that supports the idea that it could be more permanent. And I was looking into polls to try and see, I keep reading headlines to that effect. Sure. One of them was from Nick Nanos at the end of February. The survey asked Canadians if they agree with the statement that the United States is a trustworthy ally of Canada. Nearly half disagreed. Another 26.9% said they somewhat disagreed. Only 9% agreed with the statement. Do you have any concern that pitch, which I fully understand from a policy perspective, might backfire strategically?
I mean, look, there's always risks in politics, and taking principled stances is one of them, obviously. I think one of the things that, differentiate us from kind of that, it's funny because often we get, tagged with the sloganeering. I would dare say that elbows up might be a slogan on the other side, but that's a discussion for another day. I think Canadians obviously, or not obviously, but I think Canadians honestly just want a deal. They would like to have that stability. They would like to see this put to bed. Our approach is no matter who's in the White House right now, if we look in the longer term, we're neighbors. We're going to continue to work together. Certainly diversification of trade is important, but that's going to take over, time to do. So, we do have a position on that we want to continue to work well with our American neighbors, and we want to see that relationship, back to some sort of normalcy. Ultimately, not to get too partisan on the other side, but we're not seeing a lot of results on that other side yet in terms of, whatever approach, whether it's if you want to say it's a permanent rupture, well then what's that being replaced with, and where's that going?
Despite a lot.
And that's a valid question. Where's the replacement to the rupture? There is none. The only thing we're seeing is Brookfield deals being signed.